The Africa Puppet Summit, a critical look at the Africa-US meeting. Ugandan writer Mary Serumaga aptly referred to the recent Africa-US summit as the African Puppet Summit 2022. In Serumaga's metaphor, a puppet, as defined by the dictionary, is a movable model of a person or animal, typically controlled by strings from above or a hand inside it. This comparison captures the essence of the event. The 49 African leaders in attendance, including just one woman, control a continent brimming with natural wealth, yet they continue to relinquish their resources to the Western world, turning themselves into polished beggars. Before convening in Washington, these same leaders had been seen queuing up in Moscow, Paris and Beijing, and were even bussed around London like schoolchildren during Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. Sitting atop a continent rich in minerals and food, instead of awaiting Western nations to come and seek aid from Africa, these leaders are voluntarily surrendering their country's wealth to the global powers. Although such summits are often packaged as diplomatic and economic engagements, this latest one in Washington stands out for a unique reason. Unlike the rising global players, China and Russia, who thrive within a world order shaped by the West, the United States held this summit to build a false camaraderie with African leaders and flaunt its global influence before its competitors. The question remains, why do African leaders continue to participate in these power games, knowing full well the exploitative undertones? These summits have little to do with altruism. Rather, they represent a scramble for Africa's resources, thinly veiled in terms like partnerships and investment. President Joe Biden's remarks during the summit were filled with promises of money, $55 billion over 3 years to advance shared priorities, another $21 billion through the IMF for low- and middle-income countries, and $75 million to support governance and constitutional reforms. Money flowed freely under the guise of solving Africa's myriad issues, and this is what the African leaders like to hear. Biden also highlighted the U.S. Department of Defense's involvement, promising a $100 million pilot program to work with African nations on security reforms. The repeated emphasis on security was as if Africa faced some endless existential threat, requiring even more Western funds. As Serumaga noted, African leaders quickly signed agreements and issued press statements, despite effectively mortgaging their country's wealth to sustain the luxury of the Western world. Uganda, for example, proudly announced the final investment decision for a $4.5 billion energy project in 2023 involving an American consortium. The Ugandan press celebrated the news with bold headlines, oblivious to the fact that the deal likely represents another form of economic subjugation. What's troubling about these benevolent cash offers is how they perpetuate stereotypes about Africa's economic problems. The West continues to prescribe the same solution for every issue, money, without addressing the structural issues that hinder Africa's development. How could the summit discuss economic growth for low- and middle-income countries without tackling the burdensome taxes, poor banking systems, and exploitative interest rates imposed by international banks? Why wasn't this the moment to challenge the IMF and World Bank, whose structural adjustment programs have devastated African economies since the 1980s? Africa's leaders failed to ask the necessary questions. How can the continent nurture its own entrepreneurs, build its own tech hubs, and develop industries that are protected from international capitalist exploitation? If the US is fiercely defending its tech giants like Microsoft and Apple from foreign competition, why are African leaders not protecting their own budding industries and investors? One of the most glaring moments during the summit was the signing of a memorandum between Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This MOU supposedly aimed to support the development of an electric vehicle value chain in Africa. However, as one activist aptly pointed out, this was essentially ceding control over Africa's crucial cobalt and copper resources to American corporations. Zambia is Africa's second-largest cobalt producer, while the DRC controls over 70% of the world's cobalt. The MOU, framed as a partnership, was a strategic move to ensure the West's continued dominance over Africa's valuable resources. In the end, these summits are not about genuine development or progress for Africa. They are about ensuring that Africa remains in a state of dependency, where its wealth is siphoned off to fuel the economies of more powerful nations. As Serumaga so aptly described, these African leaders have become mere puppets in the hands of global powers, performing their roles in a well-rehearsed play where the only winners are the puppet masters. A clear takeaway from this critique is that Africa's greatest challenge lies less with external influences and more with a pattern of self-serving leadership that has dominated the continent's political space. The sooner African citizens acknowledge this reality, the sooner meaningful change becomes achievable. Join Diaspoint in addressing leadership challenges that hinder Africa's path to progress. We believe in fostering a vision that drives Africa toward sustainable development and genuine transformation. Help amplify Diaspoint's views on real issues by sharing our messages within your network. Together we can make a meaningful impact on Africa's future. Diaspoint, empowered by Africans in diaspora.